Hello, everyone. This is the first episode of Bornokotha, a podcast in Bangladesh dedicated specifically to the transgender community that we have. For our first episode, I have a non binary friend of mine. They go by they, them pronouns. Before I dive into this any further, would you like to introduce yourself?
Well, I'm a non binary bisexual who has always lived in the suburbs of Bangladesh, and I've lived a quite comfortable life in the sense as a man, but and at one point I realized that that did not make me happy, and as I realized that I was non binary, life got a lot harder for me, and now it is an uphill battle, but now I am in a position where I am more in tune or in more acceptance with myself than I was before.
W- Why did you decide that being non binary was specifically the right decision for you? What events or chain of events in your life led you to this discovery about your own self?
I mean, that's a really good question. Mostly, it was the fact that I uh, I used to be in this relationship with a girl a few years ago, and in as I grew up, as I hit puberty, I realized that I just was not fulfilled by these labels that was put on me. I wasn't fulfilled with the role of the masculine man with a girlfriend, and I just it didn't speak to me. I felt something else entirely. I didn't feel like a woman. It's a very innate feeling, feeling like a man or feeling like a woman or feeling like something. You just know that you don't feel that way. You can't really put specificities about what it is that makes you a man or a woman, but you just know you don't feel that way. And that's how I felt in that relationship. And I considered many options, and it was very hard for me to deal with. I spent a lot of my life in denial about it. I tried to be more masculine. I tried to be the way that people wanted me to be. But I realized it just didn't make me happy. I didn't like how I looked. I didn't like what I wore. I didn't like who I was as a person. And when this unfulfillment hit me, I realized that I was something more or different than what is usual. And this led me on this journey of reflection and self identity hunting, which led me to tell my girlfriend at the time what I was. And it was met with acceptance, and we soon broke up after that. But it was a very respectful ordeal. And I'm thankful for the fact that this was dealt in such a respectful and a manner that was worthy of acceptance because it helped me a lot. But other than that, I just felt it left me alone with these feelings of shame and disgust at myself to deal with alone. And it was an uphill battle for me dealing with all of that. But now I'm in a state that calls for much more peace within myself and more acceptance.
That's very brave of you. Thank you for opening up. Uh, do you feel like your relationship or the way that you approach that relationship changed with you coming to terms with your gender identity?
Well, certainly, it in the sense that I realized that I wasn't happy with these gender roles that were put on me, that I wouldn't like to be a man in the relationship. It just felt so restricting and unfulfilling to me. And I just felt that I couldn't fulfill that role, these conventional gender roles that were put on me. And it changed the way I viewed relationships in the sense that I came to see relationships as more of an equal stature thing than something that has particular roles set in each side.
Do you think it has like affected your dating life now? Are you dating anyone? Do you think your choices or you basically just your idea or your notions of love has changed after you came into terms with your identity?
I mean, if you're asking about whether I see love as a different thing than what it is, than what I thought it was before, in that case, no, because love is love. It's not anything different. Even for a transgender person, it's just love, you know? Love is no different whether you're a man, a woman, or anything else in between. And and if you're asking about my dating life, there's a very big community of accepting people and LGBTQ plus people in Bangladesh. A lot that people don't know. There are various spaces where there are thousands of LGBTQ people, and these are safe spaces where you can meet people. Some are good, some are bad, like any circles in the world. These are, of course, all humans, and you find people that you can love from there. People who accept you for who you are, people who don't make you feel ashamed of who you are.
That's beautiful. I did not know that there were that many circles or sanctuary spaces in Bangladesh, especially. You said that you feel like neither a man nor a woman. How does that really translate into the life that you lead? Do you dress differently? Do you act differently? How would you really describe what this feels like to an average Bangladeshi who probably does not understand gender identity or theory?
Well, firstly, as I said, I don't usually dress like a man or a woman anymore. I just dress like I feel like, like what I feel my identity is. I don't behave any differently than I used to before. Now I just feel more comfortable with how I behave. It's the thing is, we're not any different from any person, we're just human, and there's no difference in behavior or clothing. I mean, yeah, we don't dress in a very conventional way that's typical of a man or a woman. We just don't like to put those labels on ourselves. Many of us go to fashion weeks and wear amazing dresses. Sometimes we wear suits, it's there's nothing different about us from any other person except for the fact that we're just not a man or a woman. There's no there's no meaningful difference between a man and a woman and us. But it's only in the matter of our personal identity.
That's super cool. Do you use they them for your pronouns, right? But also, do you think you fit into the Hijra community as it traditionally has been in Bangladesh? Or do you fit into other spaces? Like, what kind of spaces do you fit into?
Well, personally, I'm a social chameleon. I can fit into anywhere I want, but it's as to the place where I feel comfortable. I feel comfortable in these LGBTQ spaces in Bangladesh. I have a lot of friends who are like me, friends in schools. There's always a group in your school, whatever school you're in, that has a safe space for your kind of people. And these are the people you want to be with. These are the people you want to hang out with, and these are who I feel comfortable with, even though I can normally interact and feel okay with the hetero community and the normal people, but I feel most safe and comfortable with people who are like me or who have been through that same road as me, and you can find that anywhere. If you're part of the LGBTQ, I assure you there's a space near you. We are everywhere. We're not some isolated disease or something. We're something that's very normal in society but also taboo.
Yeah, I have a quick question. Do your parents know about this, or is it just your specific friend group that are the only people that know your lifestyle choices?
Well, about my lifestyle choices, the fact about me being non-binary, that's something that only very, very specific people know. Like, and I mean like very few. But about being bisexual, I remember this one story where I was watching a movie with my mother, and it somehow we got into a discussion about the LGBTQ, and I just told her, as because I was a young stupid person, and it didn't work out well. It brought me a lot of trouble and a lot of abuse, verbal and all. And although I'm not out to my parents, they prefer it when I have a girlfriend. Now, most parents don't like their kids to have boyfriends or girlfriends. But my parents encourage me to have a girlfriend because they're afraid that if I don't, it's probably going to be a man, which is a bit funny ordeal. But also in terms of my school life, or let's say former school life, I was outed by an ex-boyfriend back in my old school, and it was a really painful experience, especially because it although the LGBTQ space in Bangladesh is very diverse, there are bad apples in there too, as there are anywhere. And this person was gay himself, and he outed me after I rejected his advances um, in a secluded place, and it was a very traumatic ordeal for me because at that time, when people got to know that I was bisexual, I was treated differently. People called me slurs, the words which I will not mention, but uh, they really hurt me because people just wouldn't look at me the same way. They wouldn't treat me the same way. I wasn't in the same circles anymore. I wasn't hanging around with the same people anymore. I was just left alone, and with the advent of me being outed, there came a lot more rumors about me because it's more easier to uh, put rumors on a person who's already character assassinated, you know? So that put me in a very socially isolated position, especially I was a well known popular guy, but then after that, it just sent me into a spiral of isolation. And thankfully, I found my space in my school, and a couple of seniors, they basically adopted me. They were also LGBTQ plus individuals, and if not, they were very accepting, and they just adopted me into their circle and just kept me with them all the time, and for which I'm forever grateful to them, even though I'm not in contact with all of them anymore. And although it was a time fraught with many traumatic experiences and miseries, it was also fraught with my friendships with these seniors who helped me through so much, and I'll forever be grateful for their guidance.
I'm so sorry that that happened to you. But I do have a question. If this level of social ostracization can happen to you, could it not have happened to the person that outed you out as well? Because that person had a thing for you, right? Why did they not feel the same level of consequences?
The thing is, they were already out as gay, and it was already really hard for them. And they just felt that if they were going down, it'd just be better to take me down with them, which was a very horrible way to think, especially because they went through trauma as well, but it was such a fucked up way to think. And I'm sorry for whoever, whatever happened to them, but it did not justify them doing that to me. And this reminds me of this fact of social ostracization that I see in my school a lot. And there was this other trans person who was completely out, and this trans person went through so much. And as a child, I used to make fun of them as well because I was not aware or accepting then. But as I figured out my own identity, I figured out that they were just a person just like me, and they were going through just exactly what I was going through. And I saw how painful it was and how detrimental it was to their mental health. And it taught me more about how this social ostracization just makes us feel less of a human in that spaces, you know?
I'm again sorry for what you had to go through, as well as what the person who outed you out also had to go through. Even though what they did to you was genuinely not right in any capacity. But with the concept of schools being brought up, do you think, like, how has school environments treated you? Do you think you fit into what the normal or standard definitions of what students are, getting to school wearing a uniform, etc.? Like, how has that affected you or impacted you? How has your experience been different?
Well, personally for me, thankfully I'm really good at blending in into things like that. I just dressed like everyone else, did what everyone else did, and I was mostly fine in that capacity. Although personally, I felt a lot of shame and disgust at myself and what I was like and what I was becoming and who I was because that wasn't me, you know? Made me feel like I didn't have an identity. even though I had one and I just couldn't show it to anyone. That was a very personal emotional toll it took on me, but outside of that, I presented myself quite conventionally due to fear of being ostracized even more.
But that bit of limitation on you, that you couldn't probably dress as you want or be who you were, it was still limiting, right?
It was, of course, limiting. It was horrible, and it did manifest itself into very self destructive practices that I took part in. And that in itself was horrible to my identity and who I was as a person. It made me feel more horrible about myself. And this was definitely a restriction that we had. But in terms of, very paradoxically, the one thing that was good about school was the school uniforms, because in that sense you just were in uniformity with everyone else. There was no way to be different there, and you didn't really look different. No one did, and that was the whole point, I guess. But the idea that I just couldn't look different from anyone else made it much easier for me to fit into that circle. But in general, however, this feeling of unsatisfactory dissatisfaction with myself manifested itself mostly in my behaviors and how I presented myself. In fact, I used to carry a tote bag around school, and that was not great. That got me a lot of words of insults, which were quite traumatizing to deal with, which were not great. But hey, we live and learn, right?
We do indeed live and learn. You're probably the only person who has had positive thoughts on school uniforms. I'm glad that that helped you out. But I do have a question. When people hear the word transgender, they usually think of a man going from a man to being a woman, or a woman going to becoming a man. It's either M to F or FTM. These individuals usually undergo surgery or go through medicine, etc., to become who they are. Do you, as a non-binary, take part in similar behavior? Do you want to get some sort of surgery? Will you take medicine? Like, what is the plan?
Well, that particular question depends from particular non-binary person to non-binary person. Some of them take testosterone, some of them take estrogen, and it is because they want to highlight some features which really highlight their duality of gender, or the lack of a gender. But for me personally, I engage in a lot of practices like body mods, like piercings, tattoos, and longer hair, and I feel that makes me satisfied enough with who I am. And I don't really feel that I need more surgeries or anything, but and or any medicine. And I feel like being able to have freedom with my hair, my body, and what I do with it makes me feel more in peace with myself and how I present myself.
That's good to know. I also have like a general question regarding just being non-binary as a whole. Like, where does this fit into the gender spectrum? Because with a trans woman, I get it, she becomes a woman. With a trans man, he becomes a man. And with non-binary individuals, they're completely out of the uh male female gender system, right? I think this also comes down to what do you think gender is? How many genders do you think they are, and how should we go about it?
Personally, I think the whole gender thing is like a social construct. There's no practical thing as a gender. If we get into theory, we're going to be discussing about Simone de Beauvoir and how the woman is the other and the man is the default, and between that or anything else is also the other. But in my opinion, the whole gender thing, the gender construct, it in itself is a social construct. The idea is that it makes it easier for people of similar ways of presenting to identify each other. Now, while I do believe the gender is a social construct in itself, the reason I identify as non binary is because I don't fit into that construct. And I also believe that people should just be able to present themselves the way they like without any need for any labeling. But at this point in time, labeling is necessary to find liberation for these sorts of people.
So you're so essentially you support a world that is post labels, but for the moment you want labels because it helps identify each other.
And to aid in the liberation of those types of people, you know.
Okay, but what about the biological differences that exist between the genders?
Once again, those are not genders, those are sexes. Now, there are a lot of now the fact of biological differences, if we get into, we'll get into sexes, the XY chromosome and XX chromosome. Now, the issue is that's not how the system is always is. That's not how biology works. You don't have XY as whatever gender and XX as whatever gender. You also have a lot of things in between and things that you can't put into a label. And just because you can't put them into a label doesn't mean they're not humans or they don't fit into anywhere. The idea is that these might be chromosomes, but they don't determine anything but our sex. They don't determine our gender or what we feel like, our way of personal identification. The only thing it provides is biological ease and medical ease in terms of chromosomes, because there are many outliers to these cases, which kind of disprove the whole XY is male and XX is female thing.
Now, do you think so? Is that how intersex people come into being? Do you think that's a good example of that?
No, for sure. They're a big part of the LGBTQIA. And they're the outliers. It's not like there are only a few thousand of them. There are many of them. And the whole Hijra community, Hijra basically translates to intersex. A lot of people associate Hijra with transgenderism, but that's actually not that fully accurate. It refers to intersex people, but we put transgender people into that umbrella.
That's an interesting thing that you said. So, do you feel comfortable being put under the Hijra umbrella as a whole in South Asia?
I don't think that's a very respectful term at all. Instead, it the the problem with the term of hijra is that is what I said earlier about Simone de Beauvoir. It creates an other. If we create the term of hijra, we're creating an other, this group of people, this collective that are almost all alike or have similar interests or motives, a community of maybe wrongdoers, or that's how people phrase it, but it creates a collective that does not exist. There are various people with various identities under that umbrella: intersex people, non-binary people, transgender people like M2F and F2M, and these are not a collective people that you can direct your hatred towards. And which is why I feel the Hijra term is very restrictive, because it creates that other, that collective that needs to be dismantled or something. It's not an organization or something, you know?
Yeah, but also you mentioned it not being an organization. Obviously, there's like a lot of Hijra communities in Bangladesh, and there's like other communities as well, such as the safe spaces that you have mentioned. Do you think internally there are disputes between these communities? And if so, how does it play? How does it affect you?
Internal disputes between Hijra communities? I mean, what do you exactly mean by that?
Like maybe, like you know how you're non-binary and someone can be something else, and maybe because they're not exactly intersex but are rather transgender, maybe one person feels that they're not a part of this community and the other person feels that they are. Do you think there are internal conflicts there?
Well, I think the issue with that kind of thinking is that we tend to think that these collectives or communities of people are just consisting of one particular type of people. We think that, okay, there's an intersex community and then there's a non-binary community that they hang out together all the time or something, but that's not exactly how it is. The individual problem is essentially an individual problem of identity. It doesn't manifest in itself into a societal or community issue in terms of the Hijra community. And what I really find interesting is how the Hijra community has mobilized itself into being a form of the other, to create, to using that, to repurposing that term as a form of their own LGBTQIA, and using it to gain rights for their community.
Yeah, I agree, because I think when people talk about the LGBTQ in Bangladesh, they don't say that out loud. They don't say the queer community in Bangladesh. They say the Hijra community. It is truly their own identity that they've manifested out very, very well. With that being said, the Hijra community still stands as like one of the most marginalized communities in the entirety of South Asia, right? Maybe even in the entire world. The material conditions that these individuals have to go through are pretty bad. Why do you think that that is the way it is? How do you think we can improve our lives from here?
Okay, so the basic story of most Hijra community people are that they come out, or they start dressing the way they want, or they do what they want, and they are excluded from their communities. Essentially, if you are a person in a village who wants a man in a village who wants to dress like a woman, or you feel like a woman, when you act on those desires, you are kicked out of the community. Where do you go? Dhaka, or any other place, really, but mostly it's Dhaka, because Dhaka is framed as the land of opportunity around here. But and when you get to Dhaka, you realize there are a lot more people like you. You try to find a job, you don't find a job. Very naturally, that's how discrimination works. When you don't find a job, what you do is you fall in with that community. You become essentially tethered to that community, because there is no other than to be tethered with that community. If you choose to be that way, you're going to be tethered to the Hijra community. And it's like how poverty works, that whole circular flow of poverty, where the lack of a job makes you more poor and all that. But this works in the fact that the transgender people try to find a job and they can't find a job, they get poor, they must fall in with the Hijra community. And since they fall in with the Hijra community, they can't find jobs even more, and their lack of income is intensified. And what this results in is this community being completely marginalized, living in slums or areas. And a big part of the Hijra community is also in the red light district, because that's the only job they can find. And that's the only job that Bangladeshis deem them worthy of. A job that is, according to them, not worthy of respect, because according to them, the Hijra community is not worthy of respect. And people who do not want to go into sex work eventually go into crime, where a lot of us can say that a lot of us have had experiences where hijras have tried to abduct their kid, or pickpocket them, or take their money, or whatever, or threaten them. This is a natural conclusion to a progression of material conditions, basically. This is how the community is marginalized and put into a box, which drives them further into that marginalization.
That makes a lot of sense, because I think a lot of individuals, when they think of the Hijra community, they think of individuals clapping their hands, begging for money, etc., without even thinking about why they have to do all of that. Why exactly is it that you can't see a Hijra person doing a regular job? Like, I don't know, being your cashier or something along those lines. It is truly sad that they have to resort to all of these things. With that being said, you mentioned the red light district, and I do agree. I think a lot of uh, queer people or the Hijra community does have to essentially engage in the red light district to make ends meet. Which does also result in a lot of diseases, right? Because a lot of these places are not the most hygienic, and a lot of other material conditions. How do we how do we save these individuals from like the diseases that they may encounter? Or like, how do you think the healthcare system for the Hijra community works? Do you think it's adequate? Like, what are your thoughts on it?
There is no particular healthcare system for the Hijra community. And if there was, I'm sure a lot of them would be alive right now, because it is true that because of the diseases and because of inadequate healthcare, a lot of them die. And this is not only a horrible thing, but the problem is systematic. It's not an isolated problem that we can just put up a page and then raise funds for them to get healthcare. That's not how it works. If the problem is systematic, you need to solve the system that makes it possible. You can't just try to solve a symptom of that problem, you know? It The way we can move forward is to enshrine these rights for the hijra community, provide them with their own spaces, provide them with community housing, provide them with safer spaces to work so that they don't have to work in the red light district, and to provide them with adequate health care. Especially NGOs could help a lot in this case as well. NGOs could focus themselves on the hijra community and go around where these are prevalent and give them health checkups and subsidized healthcare. You know, that's how we could help the hijra community. But it's a systematic problem. It's not something you and I can just do.
So who really can? Is it politicians?
Well, we all know how politicians are, and I wouldn't say politicians. I would more point that towards the government and to lawmakers and workers in that sphere, because they are the ones, these lawmakers, who can make these rights for the hijra community and actual meaningful change to their lives. And I also believe that the current government is incapable of that, but that is a conversation for another podcast.
With I understand, but what types of steps or what kind of laws would you like to see enacted that would help you or or the people in your community?
Well, firstly, the first cause that I mentioned towards this exclusion of hijra people was that they get excluded from their community. Now, what we can do to fix that is government programs which help with awareness of these types of people and acceptance of these types of people, and show them how. Uh, and obviously, since we are a very Islamic country, we have to show that this is not something that's directly opposing Islam, but rather we as Muslims are supposed to not judge and give them space to survive as well. That is our job as a good Muslim. That this is how these awareness programs need to be uh, put forward, you know. And once that is solved, I'm sure there would be lesser people excluded because of their transness. And then we could work towards housing for the Hijra community that are quite displaced right now in Dhaka city and many other cities. And then we could work towards getting the Hijra community employment at places that provide them decent income to live out their lives in their houses so that they don't fall into sex work. And I believe with this three pronged approach of the government, this is an easily, but a simple solution to a very large and widespread problem. This is what the government could do and what they're not doing, what they're choosing not to do. It's essentially murder.
I see. That approach does make sense. You talk about religion. Are you religious? Are you still Muslim? How has your identity and your religious values ever, you know, how do they match each other?
Now, I must say that I am not a Muslim, and I this was not because of my identity or who I chose to be. It was a very conscious decision that I came to because of my own philosophical reasonings and political reasonings. And I never thought of my identity as a barrier to religion, which is what people would like me to think. A lot of Muslim people and a lot of Muslim people who are not open about these things would like me to feel that my identity is not in terms with their religion or what our collective religion is, but I've never seen that as a barrier. I know Muslims who are bisexual. I know people who have different and diverse identities who are also Muslim because they interpret Islam in a much more favorable light. And this is why I don't particularly see Islam as this big opposing force to transgenderism or the LGBTQIA. I see it as a force that could help them in the case that it could help other people accept them in that circles, you know? But personally, I am philosophically opposed to religion.
I see that. I don't know how to feel about that, but I understand that that's your opinion. Uh, Thank you for having this discussion with me. It was genuinely a bit of an eye opener, especially the conversation regarding the like why non-binary people feel the way that they do and like what space they occupy within the gender spectrum. I genuinely had very little idea about that. Thank you again for being on this episode, and thank you everyone for watching. We will cut it here. Goodbye everyone.